as I was preparing for today, I felt God give me a story. And I want to share that story with you, and I want you to listen intently. I want you to imagine you're at pre-primary school, and the teacher is about to tell you a story. And you come and sit on the carpet, and you're like, I want to hear the story. It's one of those moments, all right? Story time. You ready for story time? All right. A long time ago, there was a young boy. He was a peasant in a kingdom ruled by a great king. This peasant boy knew about the king and saw the castle a far way off. He could see that it was a busy and successful place with lots of knights and messengers going around from in and out the castle. He was impressed by it and wondered what it could be like on the inside of the castle walls. What did they eat? How did they live? What kind of music was playing in the king's courts? What this peasant boy did not know, that behind those castle walls, the king was on a daily mission. You see, the king had a son, but his son was taken from him one night while he was still a baby. And ever since, the king has not stopped looking and waiting on his boy. Each morning he wakes up with an expectation that today is the day that his son will return safely. And every night as he closes his eyes, he thinks of his son and he hopes that he will come home soon. Back to the peasant boy in the streets. He's in the kingdom outside the walls. One day, the boy decided that he wanted to get a closer look at this magnificent castle and all the comings and goings of the knights and the messengers. So he made his way through the city streets and came closer and closer to the castle gate. He waited for a horse and cart to return through the gate back to the castle, and just at the right time, he rolled underneath the cart and grabbed hold of the bottom of the cart and just prayed that no one will see him. And then he snuck into the castle, and he was sneaking past the guards and all kinds of people moving hastily about. He had his eye on the horse stables. He wanted to see the majestic pedigree, kingly horses that he has always admired from afar, up close and personal. He eventually made his way into the stables. There he was able to pause and see the pristine, clean stables and the perfectly groomed, purebred horses. He was in awe. Meanwhile, the peasant's boy's stepfather had noticed that he was gone and not busy doing the torturous chores he had given him to do. So he started tracking him. And he too was now inside the castle walls, close to where the boy was. You see, part of the reason the boy was curious about the castle is that he never felt truly at home with his stepdad. He had the strong sense that he belonged somewhere else, doing something more significant with his life. He could do all the chores and do them well, but it never seemed to be good enough. And the next day, he just had to do them all over again. He longed for something he couldn't explain. But he was drawn to the castle. He didn't know why exactly, but he just had to go. The boy left the stables and made his way to the castle door of the nearest corridor that led to the king's courts. He stealthily snuck past more guards and finally stepped into the corridor. And he started down the corridor. As he was doing that, he heard voices in the distance. One voice in particular stood out from the rest. It has authority. It was authoritative and strong and clear, yet surprisingly gentle at the same time. But more than that, the voice sounded familiar to the boy, but he didn't know why. But he was drawn to it. He kept moving down the massive hallway toward the voice. But then he heard another voice. A stern, angry whisper shout came from behind. He flung around only to see his stepfather sneak up on him in a silent but quick way. He froze in a second. What should he do? Then things got worse. A guard came around the corner and spotted both of them and said, "Halt, who goes there?" he commanded. The boy flung around to the guard. His gaze was now desperately flinging back and forth from his stepdad to the guard. the dad said, this worthless peasant of a boy escaped and came here without permission. I'm simply here to take him back to where he belongs. The guard looked at the boy's appearance. Him and his clothes were dirty. He smelled bad, and he seemed to be malnourished and tired. Is this true, lad? The guard asked the boy. It's true, sir, the boy said defeatedly. You worthless little ingrate, come here right now and I'll take you back to your chores. There's a great punishment waiting for you when you get home. Just then, the strong, gentle voice came into the conversation. What seems to be the problem here? Asked the king. The guard brought the king up to speed. The boy stood absolutely mesmerized at the king. That voice, he knows it. He just knows it. The boy dropped to his knees before the king. Tears welled up in his eyes. The guard stepped in and crushed his spear in front of the boy in an effort to shield the king should the boy try something. The king put his hand on the guard's shoulder as if to say, it's okay. The guard looked at the king and immediately stepped aside. The king knelt down before the boy and said, what is wrong, son? The question and hearing the word son just broke the dam of emotions inside the boy. He started sobbing uncontrollably. Ah, pathetic, snarled the stepdad. Let's just get out of here, you absolute waste of space. Quiet, the king said to the stepdad. Immediately the stepdad stopped and shut up. The boy was amazed through his tears and turned to see the stepdad take a step back. In that moment, as the boy turned his head, the king noticed something on the boy's neck, a birthmark. The king asked the boy, may I see your neck? Of course, the boy answered. The king came even closer and pulled down the collar. Then he gasped loudly. Could it be? He exclaimed. He took the boy's face in his hands and looked at him deeply in his eyes. Is this, could it be? I've been looking relentlessly all these years, but it must be you. Only you can have the royal birthmark, which is unique to my royal bloodline. My son, you are my son. You've been missing, but today you have returned. I love you, my son. And he hugged the boy and picked him up and started dancing and rejoicing. The stepdad said, Your Majesty, that's my boy. You cannot just take him. He belongs to me. And the king said, just how do you know this is your boy? The stepdad made up a story, but the king knew he was lying and confronted him. You stole him from his room, didn't you? He hesitated and suddenly looked for a gap to run away. But he was seized and put into custody. Even as they dragged him off, he shouted lies at the boy. You don't belong here. You're a worthless oxygen thief who is good for nothing but working like a slave. But as the boy kept looking into the eyes of the king and listening to his voice, the lies of the stepdad were drowned out. The boy put his head on the king's chest and closed his eyes. He was finally home where he belonged. Years later, the boy, who was now a prince, had been trained in the ways of his father's kingdom. One day, his father came to him and said, I rule this land. And as my son, you get to rule with me. There are many people in our kingdom, and a great deal of them do not know the way of our kingdom yet. I need you to go with a battalion of knights and messengers and reach out to the villages on this map, showing him the map. Go and spend time with them, teaching them about what I want for them and for this kingdom. Help them to see how we do things and how I see them and how they can contribute to the expansion of the kingdom. Because you are my son, I will be with you in spirit always. Now go.